Michael Carter had always enjoyed the quiet solitude of his home, nestled at the end of a peaceful street. His house was his sanctuary. That afternoon, however, tranquility shattered when he looked out the window and saw a woman in a bright green tracksuit standing in his driveway, yelling into her phone. Nearby, a tow truck idled, its driver looking unsure, caught in the middle of whatever was unfolding. Michael frowned, his heartbeat quickening as he recognized the car they were about to tow, his prized 1972 Chevrolet Chevelle. He had spent years restoring it, pouring in countless hours of meticulous care to bring it back to its former glory. The sight of a stranger attempting to haul it away sent a surge of anger through him. At first, he thought it had to be a mistake. Surely, no rational person would randomly tow someone else's vehicle. But as he stepped outside to confront the woman, the way she carried herself, smug with arms crossed as if she owned the place, told him this was no misunderstanding. "Excuse me," Michael called out, his voice calm but firm. "What do you think you're doing?" The woman turned, her expression unreadable at first, then morphing into an amused smirk. "Oh, there you are," she said, as if he were the intruder. "This car is parked illegally, and I'm having it removed." Michael's jaw tightened. He glanced at his car, parked neatly within the boundary of his own driveway, not blocking anything. "Illegally," he repeated, incredulous. "This is my driveway, and that's my car." The woman rolled her eyes as if he were a child who simply didn't understand the rules. "Actually, this is a shared driveway," she said matter-of-factly, pointing to the concrete path that led from the street to his garage. "And your car is in violation of HOA regulations." Michael stared at her, trying to process her words. He had owned this house for years, and when he purchased it, he made sure to get all legal documentation. His driveway was private property, not a shared space. As for the HOA, they had no jurisdiction here. His home was outside their control, something he had verified before moving in. "Listen," Michael said, taking a deep breath, trying to keep his anger in check. "I don't know who you are or where you're getting this from, but you can't just tow someone's car because you feel like it." "Oh, I can," she shot back, arms crossed, standing her ground. "And I will. You see, you've been causing problems for the entire neighborhood. That car of yours is too loud, too old, and frankly, it's an eyesore. We're trying to maintain a respectable community here." Michael could feel his blood boiling now. It wasn't just the ridiculousness of her claim. It was the sheer arrogance in her tone. She actually believed she had the authority to dictate what he could and couldn't do on his property. "This car is none of your business," he said sharply. "Now, I suggest you leave before I call the police." The woman let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh, please," she taunted. "Call them. I'd love to explain to the cops how your car is violating HOA rules." Michael turned his attention to the tow truck driver, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "And you," he said, addressing him directly. "You know this is illegal, right? You can't tow a car without the owner's consent, especially not from private property." The driver hesitated, shifting uneasily. "Look, lady," he said, directing his words to the woman. "I don't want any trouble. Are you sure this is okay?" "It's fine," she snapped, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I already called the HOA president. They approved it. Just do your job." Michael took another deep breath, steadying himself. This wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about standing his ground against someone who thought they could push him around. "The HOA doesn't own this property," he said, stepping between her and the car, his voice unwavering. "And if you so much as touch this vehicle, I will make sure you regret it." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The woman's smirk faltered as she realized Michael wasn't going to be intimidated. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, frustration, maybe even doubt. Then, after a tense silence, she jabbed a finger in his direction. "You'll regret this," she hissed. With that, she turned on her heel and stomped toward the street. The tow truck driver, clearly relieved to be out of the situation, mumbled an apology before following her. Michael stood there, heart still pounding, watching as they drove away. But as much as he wanted to believe that was the end of it, he knew better. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The uneasy calm didn't last long. The next morning, Michael woke up to find a note taped to his front door. It was printed on official-looking HOA letterhead, but something about it felt off. The wording was vague, almost as if whoever wrote it was trying to sound professional but didn't quite know how. This is your last warning to remove the unapproved vehicle from the driveway. Failure to comply will result in further action being taken. No signature, no contact number, just the HOA logo slapped at the top like it had been copied and pasted from a Google search. Michael let out a bitter chuckle as he read it. The HOA had no jurisdiction here. His property wasn't even part of their neighborhood. This was clearly another stunt from Nancy, as he had started calling her in his head. Instead of intimidation, the note only strengthened his resolve. He wasn't about to be bullied out of his own rights. That afternoon, he noticed her again, Nancy, standing across the street, arms folded, her gaze locked on his driveway. She wasn't even trying to be subtle. Every time he stepped outside, he could feel her watching him. Her piercing stare followed him like a hawk tracking its prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. Michael had dealt with nosy neighbors before, but this was something else. This woman was obsessed. He needed proof. That evening, he installed a security camera above his garage, angling it to get a clear view of the driveway. He had a feeling that this wouldn't be the last time she tried something. And he was right. The next morning, another note. This time it was stuck to his windshield. Notice of violation. Your vehicle is in non-compliance with community standards. A fine of $500 will be imposed if it is not removed within 48 hours. Michael shook his head, torn between amusement and disbelief. She was really trying to push this HOA angle, despite having no actual authority. As the days passed, the harassment continued. Nancy kept her vigil, always lurking, always watching. Then came the staged complaints. First, a call to the city claiming Michael's car was abandoned. An inspector arrived, looked at the pristine, obviously functioning vehicle, and rolled his eyes before leaving. Then, another call, this time to noise control, saying his car was disturbing the peace. Michael hadn't even driven it in 2 days. It was almost funny how desperate she was, almost. One evening, just as he was about to head to bed, a faint noise from outside caught his attention, a soft clink like metal tapping against metal. Michael's stomach twisted. Grabbing his phone, he crept toward the window and peered outside. His breath caught as he saw her, Nancy, crouched by his car, a pair of bolt cutters in her hands. Adrenaline surged through him. Throwing open the front door, he stormed outside. "Hey," he barked. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Nancy jumped to her feet, startled, the bolt cutters dangling in her hands like a smoking gun. "Oh," she said, feigning innocence. "I was just checking something." Michael folded his arms. "Checking what?" "Making sure your car isn't leaking oil all over the driveway," she said smoothly, regaining her composure. Michael narrowed his eyes. "You were trying to cut the lock on my wheel clamp." Her eyes flickered with something. Anger, annoyance, maybe even embarrassment. But then, like flipping a switch, she straightened up and crossed her arms. "Go ahead," she said smugly. "Call the police. I'd love to see what they have to say about your illegal modifications." Michael's jaw clenched. "Illegal? Lady, you don't even know the law." "I know enough," she shot back. "And I know the HOA rules against these kinds of vehicles." Michael took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "This is not an HOA property. You have zero authority here." She didn't respond to that, but instead of backing down, she just sneered at him. "We'll see about that," she said before storming off into the night. Michael stood there, heart pounding, watching her retreat. He had a sinking feeling this was just the beginning. Michael woke up the next morning expecting to feel some sort of relief. He had caught Nancy red-handed with the bolt cutters. Surely after being confronted, she would back off. He was wrong. As soon as he stepped outside, his heart plummeted. His beloved 1972 Chevrolet Chevelle, the car he had spent years restoring, pouring his blood, sweat, and soul into, was vandalized. Deep, jagged scratches ran along the driver's side door, the kind of scratches that didn't happen by accident, the kind that someone deliberately carved in with pure, spiteful intent. Michael's hands clenched into fists. He didn't need to guess who had done this. His jaw tightened as he stormed back inside and pulled up the security footage from the night before. His stomach churned as he fast-forwarded through the timeline. Then, there she was, Nancy, wearing the same damn green tracksuit, sneaking onto his driveway under the cover of darkness. In the grainy footage, he saw her pull something from her pocket, her keys. Then, with a look of pure malice on her face, she dragged them across his car's pristine paint, over and over again. Michael felt his blood pressure spike. He immediately called the police. When the officer arrived, Michael wasted no time. "I have everything on camera," he said, leading him to the footage. The officer watched in silence as the video played. When it ended, he let out a slow breath and jotted something down in his notebook. "Well," he said, "that's pretty damning." Michael crossed his arms. "So what now?" "We'll file a report and look into it," the officer said. "She'll probably deny it, but with footage like this, we have a solid case. I'd advise you to keep your car covered or in a garage if possible. If she's willing to key it once, she might try something worse." Michael's stomach twisted. He didn't have a garage, just a driveway. The officer left, promising to follow up, but Michael knew better than to expect immediate action. He had just declared war on Nancy, and she wouldn't take it lying down. Less than 24 hours later, a new letter arrived. It was another HOA violation notice. Penalty notice, immediate action required. You have been issued a fine of $500 for continued violation of neighborhood aesthetic standards. If the vehicle is not removed within 48 hours, further action will be taken. Michael let out a humorless laugh. She was doubling down. His mind raced. Did she have actual connections to the HOA, or was she just making these letters up? Not wanting to leave anything to chance, he drafted a formal appeal, attaching legal documents proving that his driveway was not under HOA jurisdiction. He even included his property survey and city zoning records. Then, he mailed it directly to the HOA board with a strongly worded message. "To whom it may concern, I am writing to formally dispute the violation notices I have received regarding my vehicle. As per the enclosed legal documents, my property is not under the jurisdiction of the HOA. Any further attempts to harass me with fabricated violations will be met with legal action. If you have any questions, I suggest you consult an actual attorney before sending fraudulent fines to a property you do not control." Satisfied, he mailed it off. But Nancy wasn't done yet. That night, Michael spotted her pacing across the street, talking on her phone. Her lips were moving fast, her free hand gesturing wildly. She was frustrated, angry, probably fuming over the fact that her fake fines weren't working. Michael was prepared for petty games. What he wasn't prepared for was how far she was willing to go next. The next afternoon, Michael ran out for groceries. He was gone for less than an hour. When he pulled back into his street, his stomach dropped. A tow truck was in his driveway again. This time, the driver had already hooked up his Chevelle, the chains wrapped around the front wheels, preparing to haul it away. Michael slammed his foot on the gas and skidded into the driveway, throwing his car into park so fast he nearly tore the gear shift off. He jumped out. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he roared. The tow truck driver looked up, startled. Nancy stepped forward, arms crossed, smiling like a cat who had just caught a mouse. "Oh, Michael," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "I tried to warn you, but since you refused to comply, the HOA had to take action." Michael strode up to the driver. "This is private property," he barked. "If you so much as move this truck an inch, you're looking at a grand theft auto charge." The driver hesitated, glancing between Michael and Nancy. "She said it was an HOA order," he muttered. "It's not. And if you check the registration, you'll see my name is on that car." The driver pulled out his clipboard, flipping through paperwork. His frown deepened. "Wait a second. This isn't a valid tow order." Nancy's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "I got approval from the HOA president." Michael took a step closer. "You mean the same HOA that doesn't own this property?" Nancy's face turned red. Michael turned back to the tow truck driver. "You might want to unhook my car before I call the police." The driver didn't need to be told twice. He started lowering the vehicle immediately. Nancy was fuming. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You don't belong here. That car doesn't belong here." Michael smirked. "Then why is my name on the title and not yours?" Nancy opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. With a frustrated growl, she stormed away, her green tracksuit flashing in the sun as she disappeared down the street. Michael stood there watching her go, his heart still pounding. He had won this round, but something in his gut told him this fight was far from over. Michael barely had time to enjoy his victory before the war escalated yet again. The next morning, he stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to take a deep breath of the crisp morning air. But the moment he set foot on his driveway, his stomach twisted into a knot. His Chevelle was wrecked. The windshield was shattered, spiderwebbed from an impact so forceful it had nearly caved in. The side mirrors were smashed off, leaving jagged shards behind. Scratches marred the entire length of the car, crude X marks gouged deep into the paint. It wasn't just vandalism, it was rage. Michael's pulse pounded in his ears as he set his coffee down on the hood of his truck and stormed back inside. His fingers trembled as he pulled up the security footage. He scrubbed through the night's recording, jaw tightening as the screen flickered. Then, there it was, Nancy. This time, she hadn't come alone. Two men in dark clothing stood beside her in the dim glow of a street lamp. One held a crowbar, the other a bat. Michael watched in disbelief as they went to work. The man with the crowbar swung first, shattering the windshield in one brutal hit. The other took the side mirrors, knocking them clean off. Nancy, standing behind them, egged them on, pointing at the car with visible glee. Then, as if this weren't enough, she stepped forward, pulled something from her pocket, and began dragging it across the car's body, carving deep scratches into the doors. Michael froze the frame, a box cutter. His hands curled into fists. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was malicious destruction of property. This was a crime. And this time, she wasn't getting away with it. Michael called the police immediately. Within 20 minutes, a squad car pulled up and 2 officers stepped out. He wasted no time leading them to his laptop, playing the footage in grim silence. As the video ended, one of the officers, a no-nonsense guy with a buzz cut, let out a low whistle. "Damn," he muttered. "She really went all out." Michael folded his arms. "So what happens now?" "We'll open a case for vandalism and trespassing," the officer said, jotting down notes. "This footage is solid evidence, and considering the level of damage, she could be looking at felony charges." Michael exhaled sharply. Good. But he knew Nancy, and he knew she wasn't going to accept defeat quietly. A few hours later, as Michael was on the phone with his insurance company, there was a sharp knock at his door. He opened it to find Nancy standing there with her arms crossed, a sickly sweet smile plastered on her face. "Michael," she said, tilting her head. "I heard you called the police on me. That's a bit extreme, don't you think?" Michael stared at her, his expression blank. "You destroyed my car." Nancy let out a laugh, light and airy, like she hadn't just committed a felony. "Oh, please. You can't prove it was me." Michael smiled coldly. "Actually, I can." Her smirk wavered. He held up his phone, tapping the screen. The paused security footage flickered to life, showing her standing beside the 2 men as they demolished his car. Nancy's face drained of color. For the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "That's not me." Michael arched an eyebrow. "You're literally wearing the same tracksuit." She glanced down at herself. Bright green tracksuit, the same one. Her jaw clenched. Michael leaned against the doorframe. "You done?" Nancy huffed, then turned on her heel. "This isn't over," she snapped, storming off. Michael smirked. "Oh, yes, it is." Just when he thought the nightmare was over, a certified letter arrived in the mail the next day. It was from the HOA. Notice of immediate action required. Due to ongoing violations including unauthorized vehicles, disturbances, and improper property maintenance, you are hereby issued a fine of $1,000. Failure to comply will result in legal escalation. Michael burst out laughing. They were really desperate now. He grabbed his phone and called the HOA office directly. A woman answered. "Hello, this is Linda with the Homeowners Association. How may I help you?" "Yeah, hi, Linda. I just got a bogus fine in the mail for a property you don't own. Care to explain?" A pause. Then, "Sir, if there's been an error." "Oh, no, no, no. Don't try to play this off. I want to know who authorized this." Silence. Then, finally, Nancy brought it to our attention. Michael's laugh was pure disbelief. "Of course she did. Well, Linda, let me make this easy for you. Nancy is currently under police investigation for vandalizing my car. If you want to be dragged into this with her, be my guest. Otherwise, I suggest you rip that fine in half and never send me anything again." A longer silence. Then, a quiet. "We'll review the matter internally." Michael hung up, grinning. A few hours later, he received an email from the HOA board stating that the fine had been rescinded due to a misunderstanding. Sure, a misunderstanding. Nancy was losing, and she knew it. Michael had won every battle so far, but he had underestimated just how far Nancy was willing to go. That night, he was jolted awake by the blaring of his car alarm. His heart pounded as he grabbed his phone and opened the security feed. What he saw made his blood run cold. Nancy was back, and this time she wasn't alone. Two men stood beside her, the same ones from before, but this time they weren't holding crowbars. They were holding gasoline cans. Michael's stomach dropped. They weren't just here to damage the car, they were here to burn it. His fingers flew to 911, his voice sharp and urgent. I need police now. I have intruders on my property, trying to set my car on fire. The dispatcher assured him officers were on the way, but Michael didn't have time to wait. He hit the floodlights. The entire driveway lit up like daylight, revealing Nancy and her two accomplices mid-act. One of the men froze, gas can in hand. The other stumbled backward, eyes wide. Nancy, however, stood her ground, her face twisting into pure hatred. Do it, she snapped. Just light it. Sirens wailed in the distance. Nancy's head snapped toward the street as police cars screeched into the driveway, their lights flashing. The two men bolted, but Nancy wasn't fast enough. Two officers tackled her face first into the pavement. Michael stepped outside, arms crossed, watching as they cuffed her. The lead officer glanced at him. You pressing charges? Michael grinned. Oh, you bet I am. Nancy thrashed in the officer's grip, screaming about how the neighborhood was better off without him. Michael just smiled as they hauled her into the squad car. Finally, it was over. Michael stood on his front porch, arms crossed, watching the flashing red and blue lights as the police car carrying Nancy disappeared down the street. His heart was still pounding, adrenaline surging through his veins. She was finally getting what she deserved, but he knew better than to assume it was over. Nancy had spent weeks terrorizing him, harassing him, vandalizing his property, and now attempting arson. She had taken this war to a level he hadn't expected, and even with her in custody, Michael suspected she had one last card to play. So, he decided it was time to rally the neighborhood. If she had been bold enough to target him, she had probably done the same to others. It was time to find out just how deep her corruption ran. Michael started with his next-door neighbor, Tom, an older man who had lived on the street for over 2 decades. If anyone knew the history of Nancy's reign of terror, it was him. The moment Tom opened the door and saw Michael, he let out a knowing sigh. Let me guess, he said. Nancy. Michael smirked. She finally got arrested. Tom's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? Michael nodded. She and 2 guys tried to set my car on fire. Tom whistled. You know, I always knew she was crazy, but arson? That's a new one. Michael leaned against the door frame. You've had problems with her too, haven't you? Tom scoffed. Who hasn't? As it turned out, Nancy had a long history of harassment in the neighborhood. Tom wasn't the first, and Michael certainly wasn't the last. She had reported a veteran couple down the street for having an unauthorized flag on their porch, an American flag. She had tried to get a single mother fined for letting her kids play outside, citing excessive noise. She had faked HOA violations for at least 3 other households, including one elderly woman who had actually paid the bogus fines out of fear. And worst of all, she had done it all under the guise of the HOA, despite the fact that she wasn't even on the board. Michael's stomach twisted. She had built a fake empire of control, and the neighborhood had let her do it out of fear. Well, not anymore. Michael spent the next 2 days knocking on doors, listening to story after story about Nancy's harassment. People were eager to talk. In fact, some of them had been waiting for years to see someone finally stand up to her. One woman, Rebecca, actually started crying when she found out Nancy had been arrested. She tried to get my husband fired, she admitted, her voice shaking. She sent fake complaints to his company, saying he was harassing neighbors. We almost lost everything. Michael's hands curled into fists. Nancy hadn't just been a nuisance. She had been a genuine threat to the people around her. By the end of the second day, Michael had a thick folder full of witness statements, screenshots, and HOA dispute records that proved just how much damage Nancy had done. And then he made his next move. Michael didn't just send the file to the HOA. He walked it in person. When he arrived at the HOA office, the receptionist looked nervous. She recognized him. After all, Nancy had tried to find him repeatedly. I need to speak to whoever's in charge, Michael said, dropping the folder on the counter. Within minutes, he was led into a conference room where 3 members of the HOA board sat waiting. The president, a man in his 50s with graying hair named Richard Lawson, folded his hands. Mr. Carter, I assume this is about recent events? Michael leaned forward. You could say that. Then, He laid it all out. The fake violations, the false HOA letters, the bogus fines. He showed them video evidence of Nancy vandalizing his car and the police report detailing her attempted arson. The board members looked mortified. "We had no idea she was doing this," one of them said. "She's not even on the board." Michael smirked. "Yeah, no kidding." The president exhaled sharply. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of the HOA, I'd like to formally apologize. We will be issuing a public statement clarifying that Nancy acted without any authorization from us." Michael nodded. "That's a good start," he said. "But you need to go further." They exchanged uncertain glances. Michael slid the folder across the table. "You need to start undoing the damage she's done," he continued. "Refund the people she scammed with fake fines. Reach out to the people she falsely reported and make it right. If you don't, I'll take this whole damn story to the local news." The president's expression hardened, but not in anger, in understanding. "We'll take care of it," he promised. The HOA acted quickly, issuing a formal statement to the neighborhood and even holding an emergency meeting to address complaints. Neighbors were furious. Nancy had abused their trust for years, and now that the truth was out, people wanted justice. But Michael knew Nancy wasn't going to go down quietly. And sure enough, just as he was starting to think she had finally accepted defeat, she struck again, this time from behind bars. Michael received an email from the HOA a week later. Nancy was trying to sue him. The claim, defamation. Michael laughed out loud when he read it. This woman had keyed his car, tried to burn it, harassed half the neighborhood, and now she had the audacity to say he was ruining her reputation? Oh, this was going to be fun. Michael didn't even need to fight the case himself. The state had already charged Nancy with multiple crimes, and her arrest record was now public knowledge. The judge threw out the defamation lawsuit immediately, stating that Nancy had dug her own grave. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail for vandalism, trespassing, and attempted property destruction. And just like that, Nancy was gone. With Nancy out of the picture, the neighborhood transformed. People who had once lived in fear of HOA fines and petty complaints were suddenly free to enjoy their homes. One family even painted their house bright blue, something Nancy had tried to find them for years ago. And Michael? He restored his Chevelle to perfection. One evening, as he leaned against the freshly polished hood, sipping a cold beer, his neighbor Tom strolled over. "You did good, kid," he said. "Took down a tyrant." Michael smirked. "She tried to run the neighborhood like a dictator," he said. "But in the end," he took a long sip of his drink, watching the sunset, "that she was just a wannabe queen with no kingdom." Michael had won every battle so far. Nancy was in jail, her fraudulent influence over the neighborhood was exposed, and the HOA had officially disavowed her. The streets felt lighter, the neighbors freer, and for the first time in a long time, Michael allowed himself to believe the war was over. But Nancy was the type of person who didn't accept defeat, and Michael had underestimated how far she was willing to go. The real fight was just beginning. It started with something small, a feeling. For days, Michael couldn't shake the sense that he was being watched, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck when he stepped outside, a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye. Nothing he could prove, but something was off. Then the phone call started. No caller ID, no messages, just silence on the other end. At first, he brushed it off as a random prank. Maybe someone from Nancy's camp still bitter over her downfall. But when the calls started coming every night, always around 3 a.m., the unease settled into something darker. Michael installed more security cameras around the house, making sure there were no blind spots. But he wasn't prepared for what he found. The footage from 2:47 a.m. showed a dark figure standing at the edge of his driveway, motionless, just watching. It wasn't Nancy. She was still in jail. But someone was waiting for her return. Michael wasn't the only one getting threats. Neighbors started finding notes on their doors, threatening messages claiming there would be consequences for siding against Nancy. A young couple down the street woke up to slashed tires. A single mother found her mailbox stuffed with raw meat, rotting in the heat. Nancy might have been behind bars, but someone was carrying out her revenge. Michael knew she had friends, people who had benefited from her reign of terror, and now they were trying to keep her legacy alive. But the moment they targeted his car again, that was the last straw. One morning, Michael walked outside to find his Chevelle completely covered in spray paint, crude words and symbols scrawled across the hood and doors. His fingers curled into fists. They wanted a war. They were about to get one. Michael wasn't about to let Nancy's cronies run him out of his own home. He bought high-end security cameras with infrared night vision and motion alerts that would immediately notify him of movement. Then he set the bait. He parked his Chevelle in the driveway, exactly where it had always been. Then he waited. That night, at 3:12 a.m., his phone buzzed, motion detected. Michael shot out of bed, grabbing his phone and pulling up the live feed. There they were, two figures creeping up his driveway, hoodies pulled low over their faces. One of them held a baseball bat, the other a gas can. Michael's blood ran cold. They weren't just here to vandalize the car. They were here to destroy it completely. And if they were willing to commit arson, they were dangerous enough to do worse. Michael didn't hesitate. He dialed 911, voice calm but urgent. I have two intruders on my property. One has a bat, the other has a gas can. They're about to commit arson. I have it all on live security feed. The dispatcher immediately dispatched officers to his location. Michael wasn't going to wait. He stepped outside, baseball bat in hand, floodlights blindingly bright as he stormed onto the driveway. Hey, he bellowed, voice cutting through the night like a whip. The two intruders froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of them bolted, the one with the bat. But the other, the one holding the gas can, hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Michael lunged forward and kicked the can out of his hand. It clattered to the ground, spilling liquid onto the pavement. The guy stumbled back, panic flashing in his eyes. I wasn't. Then the sound of sirens split the air. He turned to run, but it was too late. Two squad cars roared into the driveway, officers jumping out with weapons drawn. On the ground, hands behind your head. The guy dropped immediately, face hitting the pavement as the officers cuffed him. His friend, the one who had run, didn't make it far. The police caught him 3 blocks away. Michael watched as they were both hauled into the back of the squad cars, satisfaction burning in his chest. They thought they could terrorize this neighborhood into submission. They thought wrong. At the police station, the truth finally came out. The two men, Jason and Eric, weren't just random thugs. They were Nancy's nephews. She had been calling them from jail, feeding them orders, telling them to keep up the fight while she was locked up. They had been the ones behind the slashed tires, the mailbox stuffing, the spray paint. Nancy was still pulling the strings, but now the police had proof. Tampering with a witness, conspiracy to commit arson, destruction of property, criminal harassment. And with those charges, Nancy wasn't just looking at 6 months anymore. She was looking at years behind bars. A week later, Michael received a letter from the district attorney's office. Nancy had pleaded guilty. Her nephews had flipped on her, exposing the entire plan in exchange for reduced sentences. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. No parole, no appeals, no more threats. Michael stared at the letter for a long time. Then, with a satisfied grin, he tore it in half and tossed it in the trash. It was over, for real this time. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The HOA formally removed Nancy from their community records, issuing another public statement condemning her actions. Neighbors who had lived in fear of retaliation were now hosting barbecues, letting their kids play outside, painting their homes whatever color they damn well pleased. Michael, meanwhile, spent the next few weeks restoring his Chevelle, buffing out the damage, repainting the panels, making it better than ever. One evening, as he leaned against the hood, beer in hand, Tom walked over, shaking his head with a grin. You know, he said, I've lived here a long time, seen a lot of crazy things, but this. Michael chuckled. Let me guess. Worst HOA horror story you've ever seen? Tom took a sip of his drink. Let's just say if you ever write a book about it, I'd buy a copy. Michael smirked, raising his beer in a mock toast. Here's to living drama-free from now on. And for the first time in months, he truly believed it. Michael sat on his porch, the night air crisp and cool, as he watched the street in front of his house. It was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in months, no one was watching him. No one was trying to tow his car. No one was sneaking onto his property with bolt cutters, spray paint, or gasoline cans. Nancy was gone, and her reign of terror had finally ended. But the shock waves of her downfall were still rippling through the neighborhood. The morning after Nancy's final arrest, Michael woke up to something unexpected. A crowd had gathered outside his house. Neighbors, people who had once kept their heads down and avoided confrontation, were standing on the sidewalk, talking, pointing at his driveway. murmuring among themselves. As Michael stepped outside, a woman named Rebecca, who lived a few houses down, approached him. "You actually did it," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "She's gone." Michael shrugged. "Took long enough." Another man, Mark, stepped forward. "You have no idea how many of us wanted to do what you did," he admitted. "She's been harassing people for years, but we didn't think we could fight back. We thought she'd always win." Michael let out a slow breath. He had known Nancy was bad, but hearing just how deep her influence went made his stomach turn. "She had all of us scared," Rebecca said. "We just let her do it." Michael folded his arms. "Well, not anymore." That night, a group chat started circulating. Someone created a private community group, a place where neighbors could share information and support each other, something they hadn't been able to do before because of Nancy. By the end of the day, nearly every house on the block had joined. Nancy had tried to divide them, but in the end, she had brought them together. While the neighborhood was thrilled to be rid of Nancy, there was another group scrambling to control the damage, the HOA board. The very next day, the HOA president called for an emergency meeting, and Michael got a personal invitation. He almost didn't go. He had no interest in listening to corporate suits try to save face. But curiosity won out. When he walked into the meeting room, he was shocked to find it packed. More than 50 people had shown up, far more than the HOA had expected. At the front of the room, the HOA president, Richard Lawson, cleared his throat. "We want to begin by addressing the recent events regarding Nancy." A wave of muttering swept through the room. "We had no idea that she was misrepresenting herself as a board member," Richard continued. "She acted entirely on her own, and we want to make it clear that the HOA never authorized any of her actions." Michael leaned back in his chair, watching the board members squirm. They were desperate to distance themselves from Nancy. Too bad it wasn't that simple. Rebecca stood up. "So, you're telling me that for years she's been handing out fake violations, harassing homeowners, abusing your authority, and not one of you thought to do something about it?" Richard stiffened. "We." Another voice cut in. "Tom, Michael's next-door neighbor. Where do you think she was getting your official letterhead? Your exact fonts and formatting? The HOA may not have officially given her power, but you let her run the neighborhood like a dictator." The room erupted in agreement. Michael let them argue for a while before finally speaking. "I don't think anyone here expects you to fix what's already happened," he said. "But what we do expect is that this never happens again." Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "We understand, and we're making changes. Effective immediately, we're implementing new transparency policies. No HOA fines will be issued unless they come directly from an elected board member with a signed statement. Any resident can challenge a fine at a public meeting." Michael raised an eyebrow. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Another board member, a woman named Linda, hesitated before speaking. "We also want to offer a formal apology to Mr. Carter and to everyone who was unfairly targeted by Nancy. We're going to void all fraudulent fines and refund any money that was paid under false pretenses." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, people started clapping. Nancy had spent years weaponizing the HOA. Now, for the first time, the HOA was actually listening. A week later, Michael was working on his Chevelle when a delivery truck pulled up to his driveway. A man stepped out holding a large envelope. "Michael Carter?" Michael wiped the grease off his hands and took the package. "Yeah." The man nodded, handed it over, and left. Frowning, Michael tore it open. Inside was a check for $10,000. His eyes widened. Attached was a letter from the HOA. "Dear Mr. Carter, we understand that you suffered significant financial loss due to the vandalism and harassment you endured. While we cannot undo what happened, we hope this reimbursement will help repair the damages caused. Additionally, the HOA board has voted to offer you an honorary exemption from all future HOA dues for the duration of your time in this neighborhood. We appreciate your patience, and we thank you for standing up for what was right." Michael stared at the letter, then at the check. He let out a slow, disbelieving laugh. This wasn't about the money, it was about acknowledgement. Nancy had tried to control him. The HOA had tried to ignore him. Now, they were paying for it, literally. Michael set the letter down and looked at his Chevelle, freshly painted, gleaming under the sun. For the first time in months, he felt truly free. Nancy was gone. The HOA had been humbled. The neighborhood had rallied together. And Michael Carter? He had won. That evening, Michael leaned against his Chevelle, a cold drink in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and red. Tom strolled over, hands in his pockets. "So," he said, grinning, "you ever think about running for HOA president?" Michael nearly choked on his drink. "Hell no." Tom laughed, clapping him on the back. "Good. You're too smart for that mess." Michael smirked, raising his drink. "To living drama-free," he said. Tom lifted his own in return. "I'll drink to that." As the neighborhood buzzed with life, kids playing, families barbecuing, and laughter filling the air, Michael finally allowed himself to relax. No threats, no fines, no Nancy. For the first time in a long time, life was exactly the way it was supposed to be. Michael sat in his driveway, a soft rag in hand, buffing the hood of his freshly restored Chevelle. The paint gleamed under the morning sun, flawless once again. The deep scratches, the vandalism, the destruction, all erased like they had never happened. He ran his fingers along the smooth surface, feeling a sense of triumph settle over him. This wasn't just about fixing a car. This was about winning a war. Nancy had tried everything. Fake HOA violations, harassment, vandalism, arson, even enlisting her nephews to carry out her revenge. And in the end, she had lost everything. Michael leaned back against the Chevelle, crossing his arms as he surveyed the neighborhood. For the first time in months, the street felt normal. No more threatening letters. No more phony fines taped to his door. No more Nancy standing across the street, arms crossed, glaring at him like he was trespassing in his own home. She was gone, and this time she wasn't coming back. Nancy's sentencing had rocked the entire community. 5 years, no parole. Her nephews, Jason and Eric, had both taken plea deals, trading reduced sentences in exchange for turning on Nancy. They had admitted everything. How she had called them from jail giving them orders, how she had told them to burn Michael's car, how she had convinced them that she was the real authority in the neighborhood. The judge hadn't been impressed. She called Nancy a dangerous individual who had abused every ounce of influence she could fabricate and ruled that she was to have no further contact with anyone in the neighborhood. By the time the case was over, Nancy's home was sold at auction to cover the damages she had caused. She had gone from self-proclaimed neighborhood queen to a disgraced criminal. And the neighborhood? It thrived in her absence. With Nancy gone, the HOA had no choice but to change. Michael had expected them to simply sweep everything under the rug, pretend like none of it ever happened. But to his genuine surprise, they followed through on their promises. Every fraudulent fine Nancy had issued was rescinded. The victims of her scams were fully reimbursed. A new rule was passed. No HOA violations could be issued without official approval from an elected board member, signed and verified. Surprise inspections and fines were banned. And most shocking of all, the HOA board issued an official written apology to every homeowner affected by Nancy's schemes. Michael had half a mind to frame his copy. For once, the HOA had actually done something right. And if they ever stepped out of line again, well, Michael had proven that he wasn't afraid to fight back. With Nancy's iron grip broken, the neighborhood transformed. People who had lived in fear of HOA fines started relaxing. Lawns were painted with garden gnomes and bright flowers, decorations that Nancy had once deemed too tacky. Someone even put up a pink flamingo army in their front yard as a petty tribute to Nancy's downfall. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood organized a block party. Michael hadn't expected to go. He wasn't exactly a social guy. But when Tom knocked on his door, grinning and holding up a six-pack, he knew he didn't have a choice. So he went. And for the first time in a long time, he saw real smiles on people's faces, not forced politeness, not fake friendliness out of fear, just real, genuine relief. Nancy had tried to tear the neighborhood apart, and in the end, she had only brought it together. A month after Nancy's sentencing, Michael received an unexpected letter in the mail. Not from the HOA, not from the police, not from anyone he knew. It was from Nancy. Michael stared at the envelope for a long moment before slowly opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in scrawling, angry handwriting. "I hope you're happy. You ruined everything I built. That neighborhood, I made it what it is. You're a nobody. You'll always be a nobody. Enjoy your victory. It won't last." Michael let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Even from prison, Nancy refused to accept reality. She still saw herself as the victim, still believed that she had been in the right. It was sad, in a way, But it also proved one thing. Nancy had never been powerful. She had only ever been loud. And now, no one was listening anymore. Michael crumpled the letter, tossed it in the trash, and walked away. Later that evening, Michael grabbed his keys and slid into the driver's seat of his Chevelle. The engine rumbled to life, smooth and perfect, just like it had before Nancy's war had begun. He pulled out of the driveway, cruising down the street with the windows down, feeling the cool night air rush in. As he passed by Tom's house, his neighbor raised a beer in salute. Michael grinned and honked twice before speeding off into the open road. For the first time in months, there were no threats waiting for him, no fake fines, no watching eyes, no HOA letters in the mail. Just freedom. And as the city lights flickered in the distance, Michael pressed his foot down on the gas, letting his Chevelle roar into the night. Nancy had tried to take everything from him, but in the end, she had only made him stronger. And as far as Michael was concerned, this was the sweetest victory of all.